What happened at a wedding that made it obvious that the bride and groom shouldn't be getting married? Are they still together? Didn't know them personally. But there was a story in my town of the bride walking in on the groom sexually assaulting the maid of honor at the wedding, and they went through with the wedding anyway. Then said bride was the maid of honor at her maid of honor's wedding a week or two later, and I think it was sometime after this that the maid of honor reported the assault. While getting up the stairs, the groom stepped on the bride's gown. She turned and slapped him and called him blind. He turned the other way and left. The bride and groom both got coked up and got into some kind of argument over the bride wanting him to help her undo her dress. It ended with the groom beating the bride beyond recognition and being arrested. He was charged and given a restraining order, and their marriage lasted 1 day. On their first dance, he kept trying to kiss her and she would avoid it very subtlety. I noticed that and thought I don't think she loves him. I wasn't wrong. They divorced within the first year. The groom had his car stolen on the morning of the wedding and spent the whole day swearing and punching inanimate objects because, as we all heard 1,000 times that day, not only was it the most important thing in his life, it also wasn't insured. The wedding was at a Boy Scout hall, for no apparent reason, and the reception was in the cafeteria at one of those underwater world places with the glass tunnel. But no one was allowed to go see the fish because, get this, the whole day had a Lion King theme. Then towards the end of the night the bride beat one of the bridesmaids half to death because she caught her f***ing a groomsman who she tearfully admonished for cheating on her. I have no idea how long the marriage lasted for. I never saw or heard from them again. One of those underwater world places with the glass tunnel. But no one was allowed to go see the fish because, get this, the whole day had a Lion King theme. This is one of the most insane things in the entire thread. Having a reception in an aquarium is weird enough. Having a Lion King themed wedding is just beyond comprehension. Combining the two and forbidding people to look at the fish is frighteningly crazy. Bride got drunk and started screaming about how much she hated her in-laws, who were obviously within earshot. They lasted a few years, had kids, and unfortunately are spending thousands in a nasty divorce right now. Not so much evidence that they shouldn't have been together, but evidence that my Scylla's just a horrible, thoughtless person. The wedding was supposed to start at 3 p.m. At 3, she was getting in a bathtub in her hotel room to unwind before starting to get ready. All of us bridesmaids were already ready. I had to call my mom and tell her that we were at least an hour out. My brother was there waiting already. Oh, and it was October Halloween, around 40°F and windy. And it was an outdoor wedding in a park with no indoor venue attached. Their poor guests ended up waiting more than an hour and a half. The divorce papers have been filed and should be final within a few months. When the priest equivalent said you may kiss the bride, she turned so that it would be a kiss on the cheek. Even as a child, that set off alarm bells. They have been divorced for a long time. At a friend's wedding 2 years ago, the bride kept the bar open until 3 a.m. after the groom went home at 10 p.m. She kept telling everyone that she is just with him because he has money and a flat. They are now going through a divorce after she cheated on him. He was so hammered he could barely stand for his vows, and they got in a huge fight at the reception. Lasted less than a year. We were good friends with a couple who fought all the time. She wanted to get married desperately and he was indifferent. After years of nagging, he finally proposed. On the day of the wedding, right before he walked out, he looked at us and sighed, well, maybe now she will stop nagging at me and finally be bloody happy. They are now divorced. She cheated on him with some guy she used to date. About an hour before my cousin's wedding, she made the comment that her next wedding wasn't going to be as big and complicated. She was right, her second wedding was super small. He was caught doing coke in the car before the wedding started. The bride was pregnant at the time. They're still married. Fight constantly and now want another baby. Husband disappeared 2 hours into a 6-hour reception because he was bored. Just went into the house and hung out on his phone. It was a chill ranch thing with games and drinking and dancing. Adults only. Also, I didn't meet him until the wedding, while me and the bride hung out pretty frequently. So there was some lead up to that. Didn't help. He wasn't cheating. Just watching golf videos. They lasted less than 2 months. They actually didn't divorce because of that. Dude 180D as soon as the ring was on. Going golfing every night for hours with different groups of people. She asked him to limit it to a couple times a week. She suggested therapy. He blew her off. She got out and is much happier. The wedding was semi-destination. 6 hours away. His friends drove out there and he ditched them too. The reception was more bonfire-y with free booze and yard games. Stuff both of them had done before with his friends. He bounced right after the obligatory wedding stuff when we finally got to do fun things. I could try and psychoanalyze what he was thinking, but who knows? Probably some kind of regret. The bride got so drunk that the bar cut her and everyone else off. The groom was also drunk. People started leaving at midnight, and the bride got mad and yelled about how they were all ruining her wedding because she wanted to dance and drink more. I was their designated driver to get them to their hotel. The entire drive there. They fought. She berated him. He cried. That was a long 20-minute drive. I could have scrubbed vomit out with cleaners. But the awkwardness has stained that car forever. They've been together 7 years. Their daughter, born 9 months after the wedding, is adorable. My brother's wedding. It was super uncomfortable and awkward during their engagement. My parents kept asking him if he was sure. He said yes. Then came the wedding. Super small. When they said to kiss, they both went in for a peck. But she turned her face at the last minute so he kissed her cheek. My husband yelled for them to do it again. I was also their wedding photographer and he knew I didn't get a good shot. The marriage only got weirder and worse from there. They acted like they were on an awkward first date every day. Finally, a year later they divorced. I have a few. Most obvious one was the bride getting caught blowing somebody other than her husband in the parking lot between the wedding ceremony and reception, and for part B, they aren't together. They weren't even together when the reception started. Try not to suck any dick on the way to the parking lot. At least she made it to the parking lot. During the cake cutting he smashed cake in her face. She immediately started crying and went to the bathroom for about 30 minutes. Then they got into a huge fight and barely spoke the rest of the night. Shockingly, they are still married. But they still fight all the time. She's my friend from college, so we keep in touch occasionally. She never has good things to say about him. My sister-in-law got married last fall and after the ceremony they got in an epic fight over the marriage certificate and didn't come to the reception until 2 hours after it started. A week later, they separated for a few weeks while trashing each other on Facebook. They're still together and she's now pregnant. I also photographed this wedding and it was the most stressful professional experience I've ever had. I forgot to mention too that the groom and groomsmen dropped a bunch of acid before the ceremony and continued into the reception. He freaked out, had a panic attack, and left. A wedding guest looking out of the window beamed at the groom waiting at the altar and said she's here. And the groom jokingly pretended to run away. It went down like a lead balloon because he had actually run away the previous year. Literally went out to the shops and didn't come back for 8 weeks. While she was pregnant with their first child. The bride's mother gave him a look that would have wilted the wedding flowers, and happy chatter in the room turned to frosty silence, just in time for the entrance of the bride. They are still together many years later and have had more children together, but I wouldn't describe them as happily married. The wedding was fake. Bride and groom were quite young and dated happily for several months. Bride was in a hurry to settle down, I think to fit in with our friendship group who had or were doing the same, and pushed for engagement. And groom was reasonably happy to oblige but not ready to take the next step and wanted a long engagement. Bride began pushing to set wedding dates almost immediately. Groom's mother and father were unwell with both physical and mental health issues. Getting closer to the wedding date, groom made it known that he loved bride but wasn't ready to settle down yet. Bride wasn't having any of it and complained to her own immediate family about this, who start harassing groom's parents about how he's a dog, mistreating their daughter, etc. Groom agrees to go ahead with the wedding if bride's family leave his parents alone. Wife wasn't happy with this, and called the celebrant to talk some sense into him. Celebrant refused to perform a wedding where one party wasn't on board. Bride insisted the event go ahead, and that they pretend it was real, but with a bunch of guests who had been married or attended weddings recently. We all immediately noticed the celebrant didn't say the words legally required for marriage in Australia. Evidently this isn't a requirement elsewhere, and no paperwork was signed. Groom's parents refused to attend the reception, leaving table 1 half empty, and not paying for the bar service. Guests took back their gifts. Bride and groom avoided each other the entire time except for a super awkward first dance. The whole thing was super surreal and awkward. They split up a couple of months later. She cared more about having a wedding than a marriage. Sad. They got married after a 10-year relationship. The wedding was painful to watch as they had such a bad fight the night before. They barely spoke to each other all day, hardly looked at each other. They split up 8 weeks later. Bride's father ran away with groom's mother on the day of their wedding. Haven't people ever heard of closing the goddamn door?